If you're drawn to stories that explore the unexpected connections between strangers, the mysteries that hide in plain sight, and the way a single moment can change everything, then you're in for something special. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will keep you thinking long after the last word. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of 847 Maple Street with an insistence that matched Sarah Chen's growing frustration. She stood in her kitchen, coffee mug in hand, staring out at the detached garage that had become the bane of her existence over the past 3 weeks. The light above the garage door had been flickering for months, casting eerie shadows across her driveway each evening. But 3 weeks ago, it had died completely, plunging that corner of her property into an unsettling darkness that seemed to swallow everything beyond the reach of her porch light. Sarah was no stranger to fixing things. As a 34-year-old software engineer who'd bought this house after her divorce 2 years ago, she'd learned to handle most repairs herself. Leaky faucets, squeaky hinges, even a temperamental washing machine. She'd conquered them all with the help of YouTube tutorials and stubborn determination. But this light was different. Every time she climbed that ladder, something went wrong. The first attempt had ended with a nasty shock that left her arm tingling for hours. The second had resulted in a fall that left her with a bruised tailbone and wounded pride. The third attempt, well, that's when things got truly strange. She'd been up there, carefully examining the fixture with a flashlight clenched between her teeth, when she'd heard it, a soft humming, almost like a lullaby, coming from inside the garage. But that was impossible. She lived alone, and the garage had been locked tight since the day she moved in. The previous owner, Mrs. Holloway, had died in the house, and her estate sale had cleared out everything except what was bolted down. The humming had stopped the moment Sarah's feet touched the ground, leaving her wondering if she'd imagined it. But the memory of that melody lingered, hauntingly beautiful and inexplicably familiar. Now, watching the rain streak down her window, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through a local Handyman app she'd downloaded but never used. The reviews were mixed, but one name kept appearing in the 5-star ratings: Marcus Williams. His profile was sparse, just a photo of calloused hands holding a wrench and a simple description: 20 years experience, no job too small, honest work, fair prices. Sarah's finger hovered over the request service button. She'd always prided herself on her independence, but there was something about that garage light that felt beyond her capabilities, something that made her skin crawl and her heart race in ways she couldn't explain. She pressed the button. The response came within minutes. Available this afternoon. We'll be there at 3 p.m. Marcus. At exactly 3 p.m., Sarah heard the crunch of gravel in her driveway. She peered through the front window and saw a navy blue pickup truck with Williams Handyman Services painted on the side in simple white letters. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. Marcus Williams was not what she'd expected. Tall and lean, with gentle eyes and graying temples, he moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades working with his hands. He wore a simple flannel shirt and well-worn jeans and carried a toolbox that looked like it had stories to tell. Sarah opened the door before he could knock, a nervous smile playing at her lips. "Marcus, I'm Sarah. Thank you for coming out on such short notice." "No problem at all," he replied, his voice warm and steady. "You mentioned a garage light that's been giving you trouble." "That's putting it mildly." Sarah led him around to the back of the house, where the garage stood like a silent sentinel against the gray sky. "I've tried fixing it 3 times, and each attempt has been, well, let's just say it hasn't gone well." Marcus studied the fixture from the ground, his experienced eyes taking in details Sarah had missed. "Mind if I ask how long this light's been acting up?" "The flickering started about 6 months after I moved in, but it died completely 3 weeks ago." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself as a cool breeze picked up. There's something else, though. Something I probably should mention. Marcus looked at her expectantly. I've been hearing things from inside the garage, music or humming. But that's impossible because it's been locked since I moved in, and I'm the only one with keys. If Marcus thought she was crazy, he didn't show it. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. Old houses have their own personalities. Sometimes electrical issues can cause interference with radio signals, make you hear things that aren't quite there. Mind if I take a look inside the garage, too? Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. I suppose that would be okay. I've never actually been inside since I moved in. The estate sale people said it was empty. She retrieved the keys from the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the heavy wooden door. It swung open with a groan, revealing a space that was anything but empty. The garage was a time capsule. Dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light filtering through a small window, illuminating workbenches lined with vintage tools, shelves, stacked with paint cans from decades past, and in the corner, covered by a paint-splattered tarp, something large and mysterious. The estate sale people said it was empty? Marcus asked, stepping carefully into the space. Sarah shook her head in wonder. They must have missed this room entirely, or... She paused, a chill running down her spine. Or someone's been in here since then? Marcus was already examining the electrical panel on the wall, his flashlight revealing a tangle of old wiring that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. This explains your light problems. This whole system needs to be rewired. It's actually dangerous. You could have had a fire. But Sarah wasn't listening. She was drawn to the covered object in the corner, her feet moving without conscious direction. The tarp was thick with dust, but when she lifted a corner, she gasped. It was a piano, an old upright, its dark wood gleaming despite the years of neglect. Sheet music sat on the stand, yellowed with age but still readable. And there, carved into the wood near the keys, were the initials EH plus MW. Marcus, Sarah whispered. You need to see this. He turned from his examination of the electrical panel, and Sarah watched his face go pale as he saw what she'd uncovered. That's not possible, he murmured, moving closer. What? Do you recognize it? Marcus's hands shook as he reached out to touch the carved initials. MW. Those are my initials, Marcus Williams. But these carvings are old, Sarah. Decades old. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. And EH? Eleanor Holloway, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. The woman who used to live here. But that's impossible because I never met her. I moved to this town 5 years ago, and she died before I arrived. They stared at each other in the dusty garage, the weight of impossibility settling between them, like a third presence. The rain continued to drum on the roof, but now it sounded less like persistence and more like a heartbeat. There has to be an explanation, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus ran his fingers over the sheet music. She was a music teacher, you know, Eleanor. I heard people in town talk about her sometimes. They said she could make any piano sing. He paused. They also said she died of a broken heart, waiting for someone who never came home from the war. What war? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Vietnam. Her fiancé, Michael Wayne, was drafted in 1968. His transport was shot down over Cambodia. He was listed as MIA, but everyone knew he was gone. Marcus's voice grew quiet. Everyone except Eleanor. She waited 47 years for him to come home. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. That's so sad. But Marcus, your initials... I know. He looked at her, his eyes full of questions neither of them could answer. Sarah, I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone because it sounds crazy. She waited. I've been having dreams. Strange dreams about this town. About places I've never been, people I've never met. In the dreams, I'm someone else, but I'm also me. And there's always music, always a woman playing piano. He swallowed hard. When I saw your service request, something about the address felt familiar. I've driven past this house dozens of times, but today it felt like coming home. Don't miss what happens next. This is just the beginning of a mystery that will change everything Sarah and Marcus thought they knew about love, loss, and second chances. Subscribe for more stories that explore the impossible connections between souls across time. Sarah sank onto an old wooden stool beside the piano, her mind reeling. Marcus, this is insane. You're saying you think you're... What? The reincarnation of Eleanor's lost love? I don't know what I'm saying, Marcus admitted, sitting on the piano bench. Almost without thinking, his fingers found the keys, and a hauntingly beautiful melody filled the air. The same melody Sarah had heard humming from the locked garage. They both froze as the last note faded. How did you know that song? Sarah whispered. Marcus stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. I don't know. I've never played piano in my life, Sarah. Never even touched one before today. Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the small window. This is too much. There has to be a rational explanation. Maybe the previous owner left some kind of recording device. Maybe... Sarah. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Look around. Really look. She turned back to face the garage, seeing it with fresh eyes. The tools were arranged with the kind of care that spoke of daily use. The workbenches showed signs of recent projects. Wood shavings that hadn't had time to gather dust, paint cans with brushes still flexible. And now that she looked closer, there were other things. Fresh flowers in a mason jar on the windowsill, wilted now but not dead long. A coffee mug on the workbench with the faint ring of recent use. Someone's been living in here, she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Or visiting regularly, Marcus agreed. But who? And why? Sarah was about to answer when they heard footsteps on the gravel outside, slow, deliberate steps that paused just outside the garage door. Is someone there? Called a voice, tremulous with age but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. She stepped to the doorway and saw an elderly woman standing in the rain, her silver hair plastered to her head, her eyes bright with an intensity that belied her obvious frailty. Mrs. Patterson? Sarah recognized her neighbor from 3 houses down, though they'd barely spoken since Sarah moved in. You found it, the old woman said, not really a question. Her gaze moved past Sarah to Marcus, and something flickered in her expression, recognition mixed with impossible longing. And you brought him back. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Eleanor was my sister, Mrs. Patterson said simply. My younger sister who never stopped believing in miracles. She stepped closer, rain dripping from her coat. She died in that house 3 months ago, you know. Not 2 years ago like everyone thinks. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That's not possible. I have the death certificate, the estate sale records. Forgeries. All of it. Mrs. Patterson's eyes never left Marcus's face. Eleanor was very good with computers, you see. Learned them late in life, but she was determined. She faked her own death so she could come back here, to this garage, to wait properly. She knew he'd find his way back eventually. Marcus stood, slowly, his hands trembling. Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake. I never knew your sister. I only moved to town 5 years ago, and Michael Wayne died in Cambodia in 1969, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice cutting through his protests like a knife through silk. But souls don't die, young man. They find their way back to where they belong. She smiled, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. Eleanor always said you'd come back different, but you'd come back. She spent 54 years preparing this place for you. The three of them stood in the rain-soaked doorway of the garage, the weight of Mrs. Patterson's words settling around them like fog. Sarah felt as if she were watching a movie about someone else's life, the rational part of her mind screaming that none of this could be real. "Mrs. Patterson," she said carefully, "you're saying your sister has been living in my garage for months? That she faked her death and that Marcus is somehow her reincarnated fiancé from the Vietnam War?" The elderly woman nodded as if these were the most reasonable statements in the world. "Eleanor always saw things others couldn't. Even as a child, she'd know things before they happened. She said Michael's soul would find its way back, but it might take time, might come back in pieces, scattered across different lives until it was ready to remember." Marcus shook his head, water dripping from his hair. "This is impossible. I have memories, a childhood, parents." "Of course you do," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "That's how it works. Each life builds on the last, but the deep connections, the love that transcends death, that stays, that calls to itself across time." She looked at Sarah. "And it needs help sometimes. It needs someone to bridge the gap." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew. "You brought them together, dear." Eleanor couldn't approach Marcus directly. The shock might have been too much, too soon. But she could arrange for the light to break, for you to need help, for him to be the one who answered. Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. "She's been watching over this town for months, making small arrangements, waiting for the right moment." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "The service request. I chose Marcus randomly from an app." "Did you?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Or did the app suggest him? Did his profile seem to call to you somehow?" The memory came back in sharp focus. Sarah remembered hesitating over several handymen with higher ratings and more reviews, but something about Marcus's simple profile had drawn her. The photo of his hands, the honest description, the feeling that she could trust him. "She guided you to each other," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Eleanor spent her last months learning about technology, about how to influence search algorithms and app recommendations. She was quite brilliant, really." Marcus was staring at the piano, his face pale. "The dreams I've been having, they're not dreams, are they? They're memories." "Fragments," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "Pieces of Michael Wayne finding their way. Back to Marcus Williams. Eleanor always said you'd remember when you were ready, when you were back where you belonged." Sarah watched Marcus sink back onto the piano bench, his head in his hands. The rational part of her mind was still screaming, but a deeper part, a part that had felt inexplicably drawn to this house from the moment she'd first seen it, was beginning to understand. "The humming I heard," she said quietly. "That was Eleanor?" Mrs. Patterson nodded. "She couldn't bear to leave this place completely empty. She'd come here in the evenings, play his favorite songs, keep everything ready. She said music was the strongest bridge between souls." "But where is she now?" Marcus asked, looking up. "If she just died 3 months ago, where—" He didn't finish the question because they all heard it at the same time, the soft sound of piano music drifting from deeper in the garage. But Marcus wasn't touching the keys, and there was no one else in sight. The mystery deepens as the impossible becomes undeniable. What force has brought Sarah, Marcus, and the spirit of Eleanor together? Subscribe now to follow this haunting tale of love that transcends death itself. The melody was different this time, not the haunting tune Marcus had somehow played, but something lighter, more hopeful. It seemed to emanate from the piano itself, though the keys weren't moving. Sarah found herself walking toward the sound, drawn by a warmth that seemed to radiate from the old instrument. As she approached, the music grew clearer, more complex, as if invisible fingers were dancing across the keys with practiced expertise. "Eleanor?" Marcus whispered, standing from the bench. The music paused, then resumed with what could only be, described as joy. The melody soared, filled with recognition and love and a longing finally fulfilled. Mrs. Patterson stepped into the garage, her rain-soaked coat dripping onto the concrete floor. "She's been waiting for you to hear her, to really hear her." Eleanor always said music was the language of the soul. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, though she couldn't say why. The music was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard, filled with emotions she couldn't name. Love, certainly, but also patience, hope, and an ache of separation that made her heart feel too large for her chest. "I can feel her," Marcus said, his voice wondering. "It's like she's right here, but also," he struggled for words, "also like she's part of me, like she always has been." The music shifted again, becoming the melody Marcus had played earlier, but now enriched with harmonies and variations that spoke of decades of practice, of love refined by waiting. Sarah realized she was witnessing something sacred, the reunion of souls across the impossible divide of death. "How long will this last?" she asked Mrs. Patterson. The elderly woman smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "As long as it needs to. Eleanor spent 54 years learning patience. Now that she's found him again, she'll take whatever time they need." Marcus moved closer to the piano, his hands hovering over the keys. Can I play with her?" The music seemed to encourage him, slowing to leave space for his tentative notes. When his fingers finally touched the keys, the sound that emerged was perfect harmony. Two parts of the same soul finally singing together again. Sarah backed away, feeling like an intruder on something too intimate for witnesses. But as she turned toward the door, Mrs. Patterson caught her arm. "Don't go," the old woman said softly. "You're part of this too. Eleanor chose you for a reason." "I don't understand. I'm just the person who happened to buy this house." "Are you?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes were knowing. "Tell me, Sarah, have you ever felt truly at home anywhere else? Ever felt like you belonged completely?" Sarah started to nod, then stopped. The truth was, she'd always felt like she was waiting for something, some missing piece that would make everything make sense. Even in her marriage, even in her successful career, there had always been a sense of incompleteness, of marking time until the real life began. But here, in this impossible moment, watching Marcus play invisible duets with a ghost, she felt a peace she'd never known. Eleanor needed someone to care for this place, Mrs. Patterson explained. Someone who would love it the way she did, who would keep it ready. But she also needed someone who could see beyond the rational world. Someone whose heart was open enough to believe in impossible love. The music around them grew more complex, and Sarah realized she could hear three distinct parts now. Marcus's tentative melody, Eleanor's practiced harmonies, and something else. Something that seemed to be coming from her own heart. Though, she wasn't making a sound. "You're part of their song now," Mrs. Patterson said, as if reading her thoughts. "The bridge between what was and what is." Eleanor couldn't cross back completely, and Marcus couldn't remember entirely, but together, with your help, they can exist in both worlds. Sarah felt a shift in her understanding, like a key turning in a long-locked door. "You're saying I'm supposed to stay here? To be some kind of guardian of their love story?" "I'm saying you already are," Mrs. Patterson replied. "From the moment you chose this house, from the moment you felt drawn to keep that garage light burning, you became part of their story. The question is whether you're ready to embrace that role." The music continued for what felt like hours. Though Sarah's watch showed only 20 minutes had passed since they'd first heard the invisible piano. Time seemed elastic in the garage, bending around the reunion taking place between souls separated by death and decades. Marcus's playing grew more confident, more complex, as if muscle memory from another lifetime was awakening in his fingers. The music told a story, Tentative recognition giving way to joy, joy deepening into love, love transcending the boundaries between worlds. "I remember," Marcus said suddenly, his hands stilling on the keys. "Not everything, but pieces. A yellow dress with tiny flowers, dancing in the summer rain, the smell of her perfume, gardenias and vanilla, and the last night before I shipped out." The invisible melody continued around his words. Eleanor's presence almost visible in the golden afternoon light filtering through the garage window. "She gave me a music box," Marcus continued, his eyes distant with memory. "It played this song." He touched a few keys, picking out the main melody they'd been hearing. "She said as long as the music box played, her love would find me wherever I was." Mrs. Patterson moved to an old dresser in the corner, opening the top drawer with reverent care. She withdrew something small and precious, a music box made of rosewood, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. "She wound it every day for 54 years, the elderly woman said, handing it to Marcus. "Every single day until the day she died, the day you came to town for the first time." Marcus took the music box with shaking hands. The moment his fingers touched it, Sarah heard a soft click and the tiny mechanism began to play. The melody was the same one filling the garage, but compressed into the sweet, crystalline notes of a music box. "She knew," Marcus whispered. "Somehow she knew I was coming." Sarah felt something shift in the air around them, a sense of completion, settling over the garage like a benediction. The invisible piano music began to fade, not ending abruptly but gradually, like a sunset dissolving into night. "Is she leaving?" Sarah asked, panic rising in her chest. "No," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "She's settling. For 54 years, Eleanor was caught between worlds, too heartbroken to move on, too loving to give up hope. Now that Marcus has remembered, now that their connection is restored, she can rest. But she'll never truly leave this place. It's sanctified by their love." The last notes of the phantom piano faded away, leaving only the gentle melody of the music box. In the sudden quiet, Sarah could hear the rain had stopped, and golden sunlight was streaming through the garage window. Marcus looked up at her, and Sarah was startled to see that his face had changed. Not dramatically, but subtly, as if he'd been slightly out of focus before and was now sharp and clear. His eyes held depths they hadn't possessed an hour ago, and when he smiled, it was with the confidence of a man who finally knew who he was. "Sarah," he said, and even his voice was different, warmer, more certain. "I need you to know that what's happened here, it doesn't have to change anything for you. I understand if this is too much, if you want me to leave and never come back." But Sarah found herself shaking her head before he finished speaking. "Marcus, I've been waiting my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for. When I bought this house, something felt right about it in a way nothing ever had before. And today, watching you two find each other again," she paused, struggling for words, "I feel like I've been holding my breath for years, and I can finally exhale." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Eleanor always said love wasn't meant to be hoarded. True love creates more love, draws the right people together like planets in orbit around the sun." Marcus stood from the piano bench and crossed to where Sarah stood. "I don't fully understand what's happening to me, to us. I don't know how to reconcile Marcus Williams with the memories of Michael Wayne that are surfacing. But I know that I don't want to figure it out alone." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something that made her heart skip. Not just the warm kindness that had attracted her from the beginning, but a depth of feeling that seemed to encompass lifetimes. This was a man who had loved completely, lost everything, and found his way back to love again. "What are you asking?" she said softly. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to explore this mystery with me, to help me understand what it means to be both Marcus and Michael, to live in a world where the impossible happens every day, He glanced around the garage. Eleanor spent her lifetime maintaining this bridge between worlds. Maybe that's what we're meant to do together. The supernatural. Love story takes an unexpected turn as Sarah faces the choice that will define the rest of her life. Don't miss the stunning conclusion to this tale of love transcending death. Subscribe to see how some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than solved. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her kitchen at dawn, watching Marcus work in the golden, light filtering through the garage windows. True to his word as a handyman, he'd completely rewired the electrical system, not just the problematic light, but the entire garage. The work had taken longer than expected, but Sarah found she didn't mind having him around. He'd moved into the small apartment above his shop downtown, but he spent most days at Sarah's house. Sometimes he was working. There was always something that needed fixing in an old house. But often, he was simply sitting at Eleanor's piano, playing the music that seemed to flow through him like water. The memories were coming back in pieces, not overwhelming floods, but gentle recognitions. He remembered Michael's childhood dog, a golden retriever named Buster. He remembered the taste of Eleanor's apple pie and the way she laughed at his terrible jokes. He remembered the weight of his army uniform and the sound of helicopters, though those memories came with shadows he wasn't ready to explore. But most clearly, he remembered loving Eleanor Holloway with the kind of devotion that poets write about and most people never experience. The strange thing, he'd told Sarah one evening as they sat in the garage listening to him play, is that I don't feel like I'm becoming someone else. I feel like I'm finally becoming myself. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing photo albums and stories about Eleanor that helped fill in the gaps. She'd also brought news that explained some of the mystery surrounding the house purchase. Eleanor set up a trust, she'd explained. Everything was arranged so that the right person would buy the house. Someone with the heart to care for what she'd built here. The real estate agent thought she was just being picky about buyers, but Eleanor was very specific about the kind of person she wanted living here. Sarah had looked through the trust documents Mrs. Patterson brought, amazed at the detail of Eleanor's planning. The woman had somehow arranged for Sarah's mortgage to be pre-approved, for the inspection to overlook certain issues, even for Sarah's job to relocate her to this exact town at the exact right time. She had help, Mrs. Patterson had admitted with a sly smile. Eleanor wasn't the only one in this town who believed in love that transcends the ordinary world. Now, 3 weeks into their strange new reality, Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm she'd never imagined. She worked her regular job during the day, but the evenings belonged to music and mystery and a love story that existed in the spaces between what was possible and what was real. Marcus emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. "The new light is installed," he called. "Want to see?" Sarah joined him outside as dusk settled over the neighborhood. He flipped the switch and brilliant light flooded the driveway. But this wasn't the harsh glare of a typical security light. This was warm, golden illumination that seemed to embrace everything it touched. "It's beautiful," Sarah said. "But how did you make it so different?" Marcus smiled, and she saw both versions of him in that expression. The careful handyman and the young soldier who'd loved without reservation. "I had some help with the design," he said. "Eleanor always did have good taste in lighting." As if summoned by her name, the faint sound of piano music drifted from the garage. Not the phantom playing they'd experienced that first day, but something softer, more settled, like a contented sigh translated into melody. "She's happy," Sarah said, and she knew it was true. "We all are," Marcus replied, reaching for her hand. Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers, marveling at how natural it felt. She'd been married for 6 years and never experienced the sense of completeness she found in Marcus's simple touch. It was as if his hand had been specifically designed to fit with hers. "Marcus," she said, Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Do you think it's possible that I'm not just the person who happened to buy this house? That maybe Eleanor arranged for me to be here for other reasons?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the careful attention he gave to all important matters. "I think," he said finally, "that Eleanor understood something about love that most people never learn. I think she knew that true love creates ripples, draws the right souls together across time and space, and death itself." He squeezed her hand gently. "I think she knew you were supposed to be part of this story." The music from the garage grew, slightly louder as if in agreement. "But what does that mean for us?" Sarah asked. "I mean, in practical terms. You're remembering a love that belonged to another lifetime, with someone who's been dead for months. I'm falling for a man who might be two people at once. How do we build something real from all of this impossibility?" Marcus turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. "The same way Eleanor did. One day at a time, with faith that love is stronger than logic." He smiled. "Besides, I'm not two people. I'm one person who's finally complete. Michael's love for Eleanor taught Marcus how to love you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "You love me?" "I love you," Marcus said simply. "Not because Eleanor arranged for us to meet, though I'll always be grateful she did. I love you because you saw a broken light and decided to fix it. Because you heard impossible music and chose to believe. Because you looked at a mystery that would have terrified most people and decided to embrace it instead." The golden light above them seemed to pulse gently, as if blessing their words. 6 months later, the garage had been transformed into something magical. Marcus had installed fairy lights along the rafters, created built-in shelving for Eleanor's music collection, and refinished the piano until it gleamed like new. But the most remarkable change was less tangible. The space hummed with contentment, as if the very air had settled into happiness. Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror Marcus had hung on the back wall, adjusting her simple white dress. She'd chosen something Eleanor might have worn, vintage-inspired with tiny pearl buttons and a full skirt that swayed when she walked. "You look beautiful," said Mrs. Patterson, who'd become like a mother to Sarah over the past months. "Eleanor would be so happy." "She is happy," Sarah replied, because it was true. The presence in the garage had grown stronger rather than weaker over time, not haunting but embracing, like being wrapped in the warmth of unconditional love. Marcus appeared, in the doorway, handsome in his simple black suit. He'd been growing out his hair, and Sarah realized he now looked exactly like the young man in the faded photographs Mrs. Patterson had shown them, Michael Wayne preparing for his senior prom with Eleanor Holloway. But he was also completely, unmistakably Marcus Williams, the careful craftsman who'd spent months renovating not just Sarah's house but his own understanding of what was possible in the world. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his arm. The ceremony was small. Just the two of them, Mrs. Patterson and a handful of friends who'd accepted their unusual love story with surprising grace. The officiant was Mrs. Patterson's nephew, a Methodist minister, who'd agreed to perform the service despite its unconventional location. "We are gathered here today," he began, "not just to witness the union of Sarah and Marcus, but to celebrate love that transcends the ordinary boundaries of time and space." As he spoke, Sarah became aware of music, not the phantom piano this time, but something else. A full orchestra seemed to be playing somewhere just beyond hearing, swelling with joy and celebration. She looked at Marcus and saw tears in his eyes. "Do you hear it?" he whispered. She nodded, too moved to speak. The minister continued with the traditional vows, but when it came time for Marcus to place the ring on Sarah's finger, he paused. "This ring belonged to Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the small space. Mrs. Patterson found it among her things, along with a note saying it was meant for the woman who would love this place as much as she did. He slid the simple gold band onto Sarah's finger. "With this ring, I promise to love you with all the depth that 2 lifetimes have taught me. I promise to build a life with you that honors both the past and the future." Sarah's ring for Marcus was new. She'd had it engraved with the opening notes of the melody that had brought them together. As she slipped it onto his finger, she felt the presence in the garage pulse with approval. "With this ring," she said, "I promise to embrace the mystery of our love. I promise to tend the light that brought us together and to trust in the impossible, made real." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the music that had been playing just beyond hearing suddenly burst into full, glorious sound. The garage filled with the most beautiful symphony Sarah had ever experienced. Not phantom music this time, but something that seemed to emerge from the very walls, from the piano, from the light itself. Marcus kissed her as the music soared around them, and Sarah felt something she'd never experienced before. The sensation of being exactly where she belonged, exactly who she was meant to be, in exactly the moment she was meant to be there. The music gradually faded, leaving only the gentle hum of contentment that had become the garage's signature sound. But in the silence that followed, Sarah heard something new. The soft sound of applause, as if an invisible audience was celebrating their union. "Eleanor approves," Mrs. Patterson said with tears in her eyes, "like this story of impossible love, conquering death itself." Subscribe for more tales that explore the mysteries of the heart and the magic that exists just beyond our understanding. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah and Marcus settled into married life with the comfortable ease of people who'd been waiting for each other without knowing it. Marcus had officially moved into the house, though he kept his shop downtown for the handyman business that had grown exponentially once word spread about his meticulous work and fair prices. Sarah had taken a remote position with her software company, allowing her to work from home and spend more time in the garage that had become the heart of their shared existence. She'd set up a small office area in one corner and often worked to the accompaniment of Marcus playing piano or the gentle sounds of him crafting furniture from reclaimed wood. But as the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting approached, Sarah began to notice changes that both thrilled and unsettled her. The house itself seemed to be awakening. It started with small things: doors that opened themselves on windless days, lights that turned on exactly when needed, even when no one touched the switches, the heating system that somehow maintained perfect temperature in every room despite being 40 years old. "The house likes us," Marcus said one evening when Sarah mentioned the phenomena. "Houses don't like people, Marcus. They're inanimate objects." He looked at her with the patient expression he wore when she insisted on applying rational thought to their decidedly irrational situation. "Sarah, love, we live with the spirit of a woman who waited 54 years for her soulmate to return from the dead. I think we've moved beyond conventional definitions of animate and inanimate." He had a point, but the changes weren't limited to the house. Sarah was changing too. She'd always been intuitive, but now she found herself knowing things she had no way of knowing. When Mrs. Patterson's arthritis flared up, Sarah would arrive at her door with homemade soup before the elderly woman even realized she was in pain. When Marcus was struggling with a particularly complex repair job, Sarah would find herself suggesting solutions that came from knowledge she'd never possessed. And the dreams had started. At first, they were fragments. Flashes of a life she'd never lived in, a time she'd never known. A woman's hands playing piano, but not Eleanor's hands. Younger hands with a distinctive scar on the left thumb. A voice singing lullabies in a language Sarah didn't recognize but somehow understood. "I think Eleanor had a sister," Sarah told Marcus one morning over breakfast. "Not Mrs. Patterson? Another sister? Someone who died young?" Marcus looked up from his coffee, that careful attention in his eyes. What makes you say that? Sarah struggled to put the dreams into words. I keep seeing things, remembering things that aren't my memories. There was a sister who died in the influenza pandemic of 1918. Her name was Catherine? No, Clara. Clara Holloway. Mrs. Patterson confirmed it when Sarah called her that afternoon. How could you possibly know about Clara? The elderly woman asked, her voice sharp with surprise. Eleanor never talked about her, not to anyone. Clara died when Eleanor was just 7 years old. She was 12, and she'd been teaching Eleanor to play piano. The pieces began falling into place with an inevitability that would have terrified Sarah a year ago, but now felt like coming home. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Was Eleanor the only one in your family who could see things? Who knew things before they happened? The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for so long, Sarah thought the call had dropped. Clara was the first, Mrs. Patterson finally said. Even as a small child, she knew things. She predicted their father's accident 2 days before it happened. She told their mother about the letter from their cousin in California a week before it arrived. Her voice grew softer. And she told Eleanor, right before she died, that she'd find a way to come back. That love was stronger than death, and she'd help Eleanor find her way to happiness. Sarah sank into a chair, the phone trembling in her hand. You're saying Clara's been, what? Guiding Eleanor all these years? I'm saying love creates connections that rational minds can't understand, Mrs. Patterson replied. Clara loved Eleanor. Eleanor loved Michael. You love Marcus. And somehow, across decades and death and impossible circumstances, that love found a way to bring everyone together. That evening, Sarah sat at the piano while Marcus worked on refinishing an antique chair. Her fingers found the keys almost without conscious thought, and the melody that emerged was new but familiar, a lullaby in a minor key that seemed to carry all the longing in the world. That's beautiful, Marcus said, looking up from his work. Where did you learn it? I don't know, Sarah admitted. It just came to me. Marcus set down his sandpaper and moved to sit beside her on the piano bench. Play it again. As Sarah repeated the melody, Marcus began adding harmonies, his fingers seeming to know exactly where to go. The music that emerged was achingly beautiful. A conversation between two voices that understood each other perfectly. This is Clara's song, Sarah said with sudden certainty. She used to play it for Eleanor when she was scared. How do you know that? The same way you knew Eleanor's songs, the same way you remembered how to love her. Sarah turned to look at Marcus, seeing understanding dawn in his eyes. We're not just Marcus and Sarah, are we? We're all of them. Clara, Eleanor, Michael, everyone who loved completely and left echoes of that love behind. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the keys. If that's true, he said finally, then what are we supposed to do with all this love? All these lives and memories and connections? Sarah felt the answer rise from someplace deeper than conscious thought. We're supposed to live them. All of them. We're supposed to be the bridge between what was and what is the keepers of love stories that refuse to end. Around them, the garage seemed to pulse with approval, as if the very walls were celebrating their understanding. Spring brought unexpected visitors to 847 Maple Street. Sarah was in the garden, planting the heirloom roses Marcus had ordered from a catalog that had appeared mysteriously in their mailbox when a silver sedan pulled into the driveway. A man in his 60s emerged, followed by a woman about the same age, both looking around with expressions of wonder and confusion. Excuse me, the man called, approaching Sarah with hesitant steps. I'm sorry to bother you, but is this the Holloway house? Sarah straightened, brushing soil from her hands. It was, yes. I'm Sarah Williams. My husband and I live here now. Can I help you? The woman stepped forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm Patricia Holloway Chen. Eleanor was my great-aunt. This is my husband, David." She paused, struggling with emotion. "We drove up from Portland because, well, this is going to sound crazy, but we've been having the most vivid dreams about this place." Sarah felt the familiar tingle that had become her early warning system for the impossible intersecting with the ordinary. "What kind of dreams?" "Music," David said. "Patricia doesn't even play piano, but for the past 6 months, she's been waking up humming melodies she's never heard before. And I keep dreaming about a man in uniform, someone I've never met but who feels like family." Patricia nodded eagerly. "The dreams led us here. We've been driving for 2 days, following an address that came to Patricia in a dream, and when we saw this house..." She gestured helplessly. "It's exactly like I've been seeing. Down to the roses you're planting." Marcus appeared from around the back of the house, carrying his toolbox. He stopped short when he saw the visitors, and Sarah watched recognition flicker across his face. "Patricia," he said, though he'd never seen her before in his life. "You have Eleanor's eyes." The woman stared at him, her mouth falling open. "You're Michael, but you're not. I mean, you're too young to be..." "It's complicated," Sarah said gently. "Why don't you come inside? I think we have a lot to talk about." Over tea in the kitchen, the story emerged in fragments. Patricia had grown up hearing family legends about great-aunt Eleanor and her tragic love affair. But the stories had always been dismissed as romantic nonsense. Eleanor had died when Patricia was in college, and they'd never been close. But 6 months ago, the dreams had started. Not just for Patricia, but for family members. Scattered across the country, Eleanor's great-nieces and nephews, distant cousins, even family friends were all reporting the same phenomenon. Vivid dreams about the house on Maple Street, about music and love and unfinished business. "We started a Facebook group," David explained. "Just to compare notes, you know. But then we realized the dreams were all connected, all pointing to the same place." "Here," Patricia said, looking around the kitchen with wonder. "Eleanor spent her whole life here waiting for something. And now that something has finally happened, she's..." "What? Calling the family home?" Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus. They'd been so focused on their own impossible love story that they hadn't considered the ripple effects, the way Eleanor's resolution might impact everyone who'd ever cared about her. "Would you like to see the garage?" Marcus asked quietly. Patricia and David followed them outside, their expressions growing more amazed with each step. The garage had evolved over the months into something that transcended its original purpose. The piano still held place of honor, but now it was surrounded by comfortable seating, walls lined with photographs and mementos from multiple generations, and a warmth that seemed to emanate from the very air. "Oh my God," Patricia whispered, moving toward the piano. "I know this room. I've been dreaming about this exact room for months." She sat on the piano bench and, without hesitation, began to play. The melody was one Sarah had never heard before, but Marcus joined in immediately, adding harmonies that turned the simple tune into something transcendent. "That's Clara's lullaby," Sarah said with sudden recognition. "But not the version I know. This is fuller, more complete." Patricia's hand stilled on the keys. "How do you know about Clara? She died almost 100 years ago." "The same way..." "You know that lullaby," Marcus said gently. "The same way we all seem to know things we shouldn't know." David had been studying the photographs on the walls, many of which Marcus had found in boxes throughout the house and garage. "This is incredible. It's like Eleanor preserved the whole family history here." He paused at a particular photo, a young woman with Patricia's eyes and Sarah's smile. "That's Clara, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, though she couldn't have explained how she knew. "She was supposed to be a concert pianist," Patricia said softly, still sitting at the bench. "Eleanor told me once when I was very young, that Clara had a gift for music that came once in a generation. But she died before she could share it with the world. Maybe she's sharing it now, Marcus suggested, through all of us. As if summoned by their words, the garage filled with the now familiar presence that Sarah had come to think of as Eleanor. But tonight, it felt different, larger, more complex, as if multiple spirits were gathering to witness this reunion. "They're all here," Sarah said with certainty. "Eleanor, Clara, maybe others. All the Holloways who loved music, who believed in love that transcends death." Patricia began to cry, but they were tears of joy. "I felt so alone since my parents died. I never knew I was part of something this beautiful." The mystery deepens as the true scope of Eleanor's plan becomes clear. A love story that began with one couple has grown to encompass generations. Subscribe to discover how some families are bound not just by blood, but by music, love, and the courage to believe in the impossible. Word spread in the mysterious way that important news always does in small towns, amplified by social media and the strange dreams that seemed to be touching anyone who'd ever been connected to the Holloway family. By the summer solstice, 847 Maple Street had become an unofficial pilgrimage site. They came from across the country, distant relatives who'd grown up on stories about Eleanor's great love, musicians who felt inexplicably drawn to the address, even complete strangers who'd been having dreams about piano music and yellow roses. Sarah and Marcus found themselves hosting an impromptu reunion that spilled from the garage into the backyard, then into the house itself. Mrs. Patterson moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, sharing stories and photographs, connecting people who hadn't known they were connected. "This is what Eleanor wanted," she told Sarah as they watched. Marcus demonstrate woodworking techniques to a group of fascinated teenagers. "She always said family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who recognized the same song in each other's hearts." The evening was magical in ways Sarah was still learning to accept as normal. Patricia had brought her daughter, a young woman named Amy who'd never shown interest in music but sat at the piano and played as if she'd been practicing for years. David had connected with a distant cousin, a man in his 70s who'd been having dreams about World War II despite never having served in the military. And throughout it all, the garage seemed to expand to accommodate everyone, as if the space itself was adjusting to hold all the love and music and connection flowing through it. But the most remarkable moment came near midnight, when the last visitors were preparing to leave. Patricia approached Sarah and Marcus with a proposal that would change everything yet again. "We've been talking," she said, gesturing to the small group of family members who'd lingered after the others left. "About Eleanor's legacy, about what she built here." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We want to make this official. We want to create a foundation, a trust that will preserve this place and continue Eleanor's work." "What kind of work?" Sarah asked. Amy stepped forward, her young face bright with possibility. "Bringing people together through music, helping families reconnect, creating a space where love stories like yours and Eleanor's can be celebrated and preserved." David nodded enthusiastically. "We're thinking concerts, workshops, maybe even a recording studio. This garage has incredible acoustics, and the piano—" He shook his head in wonder. "That piano should be shared with the world." Marcus looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. They'd built a beautiful life in their magical garage, but they'd always known it was bigger than just the two of them. "What would that mean for us?" Sarah asked. "This is our home." "It would still be your home," Patricia assured her. "But it would also be something more, a place where people could come to remember that love is stronger than death, that music connects souls across time, that some mysteries are meant to be lived rather than solved." Sarah felt the presence in the garage pulse with excitement, as if Eleanor herself was endorsing the plan. Over the following months, the Holloway Foundation took shape with the same mysterious efficiency that had characterized everything else about their story. Funding appeared from unexpected sources: distant relatives who'd made good, musicians who'd been touched by dreams of the garage, even a recording company executive who swore he'd been guided to contribute by his late grandmother's spirit. The garage was expanded and professionally soundproofed, but carefully, with Marcus overseeing every detail to ensure the space retained its essential character. The piano was restored by a master craftsman who claimed to have learned his trade in dreams, and additional instruments were donated by people who felt called to contribute. But the most important addition was the story wall, a carefully curated collection of photographs, letters, and mementos that told the tale of Eleanor and Michael, Clara, and the entire extended family of souls who'd found their way to Maple Street. 2 years after that first day when Marcus had come to fix a simple garage light, Sarah stood in the renovated space watching him tune the piano for that evening's concert. The Holloway Foundation's first official event would feature Amy Holloway Chen, now an accomplished pianist, despite having never taken formal lessons, performing a program of music that had come to her in dreams. The audience would be small, just family, friends, and a handful of music critics who'd been intrigued by the story. But Sarah knew the performance would be anything but ordinary. "Nervous?" Marcus asked, looking up from the piano keys. "Excited," Sarah corrected. "And grateful. A year ago, I thought I was just a divorced software engineer living in a quirky old house. Now you're a divorced software engineer living in a quirky old house that happens to be the center of a supernatural love story spanning multiple lifetimes," Marcus finished with a grin. "When you put it like that, it sounds almost normal." Marcus laughed, the sound rich and warm in the space that had become their shared sanctuary. "I think normal is overrated." The guests began arriving as the sun set, filling the garage with conversation and anticipation. Mrs. Patterson held court near the photograph wall, sharing stories with anyone who'd listen. Patricia and David had driven up from Portland with Amy and several other family members. Even some of the neighbors had come, drawn by curiosity about the strange happenings at 847 Maple Street. But as Amy took her place at the piano and the conversation died away, Sarah felt the familiar presence settle over the gathering. Eleanor was there, and Clara, and perhaps others, all the spirits who'd found peace in this place where love had conquered death. Amy's hands found the keys, and the first notes that emerged were the melody Sarah had heard that very first day, the humming from the locked garage that had started everything. But now it was fully realized, complex and beautiful and heartbreaking in its perfection. The music flowed from one piece to another, each song telling part of the story. Clara's lullaby, performed with the skill of a master despite Amy's youth. Eleanor's favorite waltz, which Marcus had taught himself to play in the months after their first meeting. And finally, a new composition that Amy introduced simply as "The Light in the Darkness." As the last notes faded away, Sarah realized she was crying. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of witnessing love made manifest in music. Around her, she could see similar emotions on the faces of the audience: recognition, wonder, and the deep satisfaction that comes from experiencing something truly transcendent. The applause was gentle, reverent, more like a blessing than mere appreciation. "Thank you," Amy said simply. "This music doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us, to everyone who's ever loved completely and refused to let death have the final word." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Sarah and Marcus found themselves alone in the garage with Mrs. Patterson. The elderly woman had become family over the past 2 years, the keeper of stories and the bridge between past and present. "Eleanor would be proud," she said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs Marcus had built. "All those years of waiting, of maintaining faith when everyone else gave up hope. She never could have imagined it would lead to all this." "Did she know?" Sarah asked. When she was planning everything, did she know it would grow beyond just her and Michael? Mrs. Patterson smiled. Eleanor always said love was like music. It wanted to be shared, to create harmony with other voices. I think she hoped for something like this, but even she couldn't have predicted how beautiful it would become. Marcus sat at the piano, his fingers finding the keys almost automatically. The melody that emerged was soft and contemplative, a musical reflection on the mystery they'd all become part of. "You know what I realized tonight?" he said. "We're not just preserving Eleanor's story. We're continuing it. Every person who comes here, every life that's touched by what she built, they become part of the story too." Sarah nodded, understanding flooding through her. "It's not about the past anymore. It's about the future, about all the love stories that are still waiting to begin." As if in response to her words, the presence in the garage seemed to pulse with gentle approval. But it felt different now, not the desperate longing of spirits caught between worlds, but the peaceful contentment of love fully realized and freely shared. "They're at rest," Sarah said with certainty. "Eleanor, Clara, all of them. They've done what they came to do." "And what was that?" Mrs. Patterson asked. Sarah looked around the garage, taking in the piano where impossible music had played, the photographs that told stories of love transcending death, the chairs filled with people who'd found their way to each other through mystery and music. "They proved that some things are stronger than death," she said. "They showed us that love creates connections that span lifetimes, that music is the language of the soul, and that sometimes the most impossible things are the most true." Marcus's playing grew softer, more contemplative. "So what happens now?" "Now we live," Sarah said simply. "We love each other. We share Eleanor's story. We help other people find their way to the impossible made real." She smiled. "And we keep the lights burning for whoever might need them." 5 years after Marcus Williams first came to fix Sarah, Chen's garage light, the Holloway Foundation, had become something neither of them could have imagined. The house at 847 Maple Street had been carefully expanded to include a small concert hall, recording studio, and archive, but the original garage remained unchanged, still the heart of everything, still humming with the presence of love that had transcended death. Sarah stood at the kitchen window on a crisp October morning, watching Marcus work with their latest protege, a young man named Thomas, whose grandmother had been sending him dreams about piano music for months before he finally made his way to their door. It happened more often now. People arrived with fragments of melodies, half-remembered dreams, or simply an inexplicable need to find the house where impossible love stories came true. Sarah and Marcus had become expert at recognizing the signs, at helping people understand that they'd been called to Maple Street for a reason. The foundation had documented over 200 such cases, musicians who'd found their voices, lovers who'd been reunited across incredible odds, families who'd rediscovered connections they'd thought were lost forever. Each story was unique, but they all shared the common thread of love refusing to accept the limitations of ordinary reality. "You're handsome, you know that?" Sarah said as Marcus came into the kitchen, echoing the words that had changed their lives that first day. Marcus smiled, the expression carrying all the warmth and depth that had made her fall in love with him, both the careful handyman and the soldier who'd loved across lifetimes. "Is that so?" he replied, pulling her into his arms. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means you're exactly where you're supposed to be," Sarah said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "We both are." Outside, the garage light burned steady and bright. No longer the flickering, failing fixture that had started everything, but a beacon of hope for anyone who might need to believe in love that conquers all. And in the gentle autumn breeze that rustled the yellow roses Marcus had planted, in Eleanor's memory, If you listened carefully, you could still hear the faint echo of piano music. Not ghostly or sad, but joyful and eternal, a reminder that some love stories never truly end. They simply begin again, in new hearts and new voices, whenever someone is brave enough to believe that the impossible might just be the most real thing of all. Thank you for joining Sarah and Marcus on their journey through mystery, music, and love that transcends all boundaries. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that explore the magic hiding in the ordinary world. Because sometimes, the most beautiful mysteries are the ones we choose to live rather than solve.